Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Extreme Performance Series video blog. I'm Todd Muirhead, and today I have with me Valentin. We're going to talk about sustainability. Valentin, go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me. My name is Valentin. I've been with VMware for a little bit over 12 years. I work in global support, and I've been doing performance and resource management, and I've talked in the illustrious VMware setting a couple of times before, and in the last few years, I tried to talk a little bit more about sustainability and more density under the umbrella of extreme performance. So it's not always extreme throughput. There could also be extreme density, which overall aids sustainability. So I guess we're here to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, so this is almost the exact opposite of some of the extreme monster database VM stuff that I've talked about before. We take the biggest VM possible and take out all the stops to get the very best, highest performance possible. From that perspective, this is the other way of looking at it with the density, right?
Oh, yes, certainly. I mean, this is not something that is one size fits all. I mean, I'm not saying whatever you learn here, right, apply that to all of your environments where you have SAP HANA running and some other things where you actually need an excess of resources. So but there are parts of your environment, right, that certainly or probably could run at higher densities with very little increased risk. I mean, all of these discussions, there is a give and take, right? And the give is more capacity, and the take is increased risk of potential contention. Now, very often that is, there's too much fear across running at higher densities, which we're hopefully trying to take with more and more information and with the features that ESXi already has. And with that, I'd like to highlight something that has come up over the last few weeks and months. If you have followed the vSphere related news, you might have seen our changes to the upcoming changes to our boot device and the requirements around that. If you are running off, let's say, a USB drive, right, and you had some issues, especially after going to 7.0 update 2, you might have seen the KB articles and the blog articles with regards to the future requirements. And I really can't get into the whys and what happened around that. And overall, it's a more stringent requirement, right? And that, of course, adds complexity. And I understand that everyone is happy with that, but there is a silver lining with getting SSD devices back into hosts by default, right? And that silver lining is something that maybe you haven't even heard of yet because it's just so long with the product, and that is host cache, right? Host cache.
Yeah, so let me just make sure, go ahead and define that for everybody. Just what exactly is the host cache? Because okay, like you said, it's been a feature for a long time, so some people may not have even heard of it.
Yeah, I think it's under virtual flash in the UI. But the host cache is basically if you have a local SSD device, right? Then you can define a portion of that or a partition of that as host cache, and that host cache sits in front of the vSwap files. The vSwap file is a representation of the physical memory of a VM. If that is not backed by a reservation, that has to sit on a data store, right? Because we have to guarantee that whatever is in memory can be written somewhere, even if it's not physical or machine memory on the ESXi host, it has to go into a file, and that file is on a data store. That data store, I mean, even in modern times, can have multi-millisecond latency, right? Now, a local SSD will be a lot faster, and host cache is basically a cache layer right in front of that. So instead of taking the whole vSwap file and putting it on a local SSD, you actually just define a portion of that. And ESXi takes care of the management of what of the vSwap file to actually cache locally, of which VM, and it'll take care of all that for you, managing with the space constraints that you have. So basically, because local or host level swap, right, has always been the biggest risk for high memory density workloads, because the order of reclamation, right, and maybe that is worth like 1 minute. I promise I won't go too far here. The memory is not proactively reclaimed by ESXi, right? It gets the operating system, boots up, and if there's memory, it'll touch those pages, it will allocate them, and it can fill them with zeros or cache and whatnot, right? And ESXi doesn't take that back until there's pressure. And we go through breaking up large pages, transparent page sharing intra VM. So basically all the pages that are same within a VM. Then we balloon. And again, balloon is nothing to be afraid of, right? Because invoking the guest operating system's own memory management usually means you get rid of 0 pages, cache pages, and then whatever is least active from a guest perspective, right? So that's a good thing. Now, after that, we have compression on the ESXi side, which is better than swap, but still not optimal, obviously. And then we have host level swap, meaning we will write physical VM memory onto a disk, and you'll be a lot happier.
This is where things get really slow. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if it's orders of magnitude, right? Because there's an analogy here, and maybe it's not the time for that, but basically going to disk is so much slower, right? That you'd be really happy to have that page fold served from a local SSD cache instead from your array that is multiple meters of fiber or whatever else away. And again, this feature, host cache, has been released, man, I don't even know the exact release it was in, but it's been at least 10 years. And it's sadly not used very often because most hosts do not ship with local SSDs. And if they are, they're used for local disk groups, for example, for vSAN, right? And you barely have anything left over there. So personally, while that change, of course, makes it also harder on my home lab, overall, I'm somewhat optimistic about the prospects that it opens up, because reducing the cost of memory reclamation ultimately will enable you to drive higher densities of your VMs with less risk. So that is definitely an upside that I wanted to have covered amidst all the negativity around that.
So yeah, so we take that discussion about host cache and you bring it back very nicely to sustainability, meaning that you can get higher density out of these hosts, hopefully.
Exactly, yeah, higher density at reduced risk. And we've talked about that our metrics are performance conservative, right? That 100% memory consumption doesn't mean that all the memory is used up and that there's ways to go. We talked about this in previous sessions at VMworld. We talked about, or we will talk about the CPU usage counters in this year's performance best practices. And there are many more sustainability sessions at VMworld in 2021. I'm sure we'll put the links in to the video notes or the blog notes.
Yes, we're going to have a link to yours and Mark's VMworld Extreme Performance Edition session. And then we'll also have the links to the sustainability sessions that you just mentioned below this video.
Great. I mean, there's definitely a lot to watch. And this is really just a modicum of information or possibility that is out there. But I don't think we have much more time in this particular forum because I see the time ticking. So Todd, thanks again for having me. It's been great. I hope I see you live again, maybe next VMworld. Until then, have a good one.
Yes. Thank you very much for joining. And that's it for today. Thanks, everybody.